the mainstream media, this is how exactly they earn their moniker of fake news. Americans see this and they wonder, don't you do any fact checking in the mainstream media? And how is it that this made the headlines of the New York Times writ large and news organizations across the country?
Welcome back to our all-star panel. President Joe Biden visited Israel Wednesday morning to show support for Israel in its war against the terrorist group Hamas. While there, Biden announced $100 million in humanitarian aid to Gaza and the West Bank.
The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy. The people of Gaza need food, water, medicine, shelter. Today, I asked the Israeli cabinet, who I met with for some time this morning, to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, based on the understanding that there will be inspections and that the aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas. Israel agreed the humanitarian assistance can begin to move from Egypt to Gaza. Let me be clear, if Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people.
We are joined by our fabulous panel of experts. And Iris, let's start with you. Former acting director of national intelligence under President Trump, Rick Grinnell, tweeted this response: the government in Gaza is Hamas. Did the president just give money to Hamas? Is that what he did?
So it really depends on if Hamas actually takes the action to steal or if not, lose the actual aid. So I've heard the White House directly expressing their concern as well. Kirby saying that Israel has talked to them and made it clear that they don't want any of the aid going into Hamas' hands. And even President Biden has said that, of course, if Hamas starts stealing these materials, the trucks going into Gaza will have to stop. So we have heard the White House themselves admitting this real risk of Hamas getting involved. But also we have heard a lot of criticism directly pointing out that, like you said, the government in Gaza is indeed controlled by Hamas. And for example, presidential candidates like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis already posting a video yesterday and coming out to say that this is an $100 million gift to Hamas.
Kingsley, how can we trust that Hamas will not simply steal this money? And are U.S. taxpayer dollars actually going to fund Hamas if Hamas actually steals this money?
Of course, Hamas is going to steal the money, and of course, our tax dollars are yet again going to terrorist groups in the Middle East. The United States has a long history of doing this. We have instituted nothing but chaos in the Middle East. We've left it a total mess. We need to stay out of these foreign ethnic conflicts. And I'd like to add that we need to reprioritize the issues here in America. We shouldn't be giving aid to people in Palestine. We should be giving aid to people in East Palestine, Ohio. And for Biden to put terrorists before the American people is truly corrupt, and it is something that we have to stand against. We can't continue to fund this.
Jonathan, my aunt used to be an accountant. You're a tax economist. She used to say, all money is fungible, John. Is that true?
She was exactly right. And that's one of the big concerns, right, is, whether the alleged purpose is to go help for humanitarian aid or not. I mean, the government of Gaza is Hamas, a terrorist organization, and these dollars are going to find their way to terrorist purposes because all money is fungible at the end of the day. We hope, I think the real question here is, what did we get for this, right? I mean, did we get U.S. hostages released? I'd love to know. I mean, I think that's something Americans across the board would love to know. If Americans are continued to be held as hostages by Hamas right now and by terrorists in Gaza, if the humanitarian aid, whether the right reasons or the wrong reasons going there, what are we getting for it?
What kind of controls? I mean, the president seemed to feel that somehow we can monitor where this aid goes, but from a financial perspective, what kind of controls can you really impose, that would actually work? Is that actually possible, do you think?
I'm just the tax economist here. I don't think it is, right? I mean, this is very difficult to do. Just the Wall Street Journal this week reported on the UN Agency for Humanitarian Aid seeing mass amounts of resources diverted away. They tweeted that was happening and then recanted on the tweet. And so, I mean, there's a lot of confusion around this right now. And I think really zero chance of accountability that these dollars are going to go to the purposes that they're sold to us.
Iris, I'm wondering about Ukraine aid. The Biden administration is rumbling that they're going to tie up Ukraine aid and Israel aid in the same package with something about border security. Is that going to go anywhere on the Hill, do you think?
So we have heard senators apparently expressing support or even a likelihood that it could go through because, like you said, they tie everything together, Ukraine, Israel, and border security, and a portion for Taiwan as well. So that could potentially ease some concerns by GOP lawmakers. Maybe they would want the border security part to be done so that they would express support for this package. So we did see this strategy by the Biden administration to tie it together to get more support. But we have also heard, of course, opposition toward, because as we have seen in the past, these packages are very big, but when it comes to the real solid, let's say, border security portion of it, how solid that will be, that is the question. And of course, that would determine how much actual support it's going to get in Congress.
Inquiring minds want to know, so we shall see. International media were quick to assign blame to Israel for a reported hospital strike in Gaza on Tuesday. But both the U.S. government and President Joe Biden dismissed that narrative. National Security Council spokeswoman Adrienne Watson released a statement saying Israel, quote, is not responsible for the strikes. Biden reaffirmed that.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there not sure. So we got to overcome a lot of things.
And got to overcome a lot of things with the president, too, I guess. But Kingsley, it's interesting because according to the New York Times, the first headline was Israeli strike kills hundreds in hospital, Palestinians say. The second headline was hundreds dead in a blast at Gaza hospital, Palestinians say. What do you make of this this reaction by the media? They're speedy to criticize Israel, it seems. What's going on here?
I think, if we needed more evidence that the mainstream media was the enemy of the people, this is it, right? We have it. And journalists have a long history of wartime propaganda and, pushing certain narratives. But I think that we really, as citizens who are looking to be informed, need to take what we are seeing in mainstream media with a grain of salt. We need to wait. We shouldn't be quick to judge. And listen, is it possible that Israel could bomb a hospital? Sure, because Hamas often shoots targets from hospitals and from schools and puts weapons in schools and hospitals. These are sick terrorists that are willing to do things like that. And this is war. But in this case, Israel, it's clear, did not bomb the hospital. They are being framed for it by the media. It's despicable. It's sick. We need to be sure that we are pushing against this fake news where we see it, because we have to be informed citizens. And if our taxpayer dollars are going towards some sort of effort in the Middle East, we need to know what's going on. We need to get to the bottom of it.
It's interesting, Iris, there were other news reports, I think, suggesting misinformation, and we're not really accepting responsibility, even though they were wrong. I mean, you're obviously a reporter. What goes through a reporter's mind when something like this happens, when you realize perhaps that your organization may have gotten something wrong?
So we have seen this play out exactly like Kingsley said, right, in the last week, where major U.S. news networks, including television stations, running, for example, chyrons or headlines, quoting the Palestinian official saying that it was caused by Israeli airstrikes. And we heard yesterday that Mitch McConnell, for example, calling out media outlets for saying that he said that basically you can revise those headlines afterwards, but the damage has been done already. The anti-Semitic the sensation has already been spread. So that is the harm potentially could be done by media outlets doing that. But at the same time, we've also seen Israeli spokesperson for its defense ministry coming out to talk to, for example, CNN, telling them that it is because what they called actually in the softer way, I think he called it hasty reporting. Because of hasty reporting and jumping into conclusions by U.S. media outlets, it's fueling protests and riots going on in the Middle East. So we are seeing, of course, such impacts.
I think we have another soundbite here. Maybe we can hear that now.
This is proof of Israel's claims that it was actually missiles from the Gaza Strip shot into the direction of the El Ahli hospital in Gaza City and not from Israel. This is Channel 12's camera. It is a camera situated in the city of Netivot, and its view is of the Gaza Strip. You see the time stamp on this. It's 6:59, and this is when it happens. We can press play on the tape, and you can see very clearly. Again, this is Channel 12's camera. You can see the rockets. This is the left red stamp fired over the hospital, which is the right, and you can see the blast. So that is proof of the fact that it came from the Gaza Strip. Our cameras, Channel 12's cameras. The President of the United States has already said it appears it was done by the other team, meaning he also realizes that it was shooting from inside Gaza over the hospital.
Jonathan, is this what economists call a negative externality?
Well, I'll tell you what it is this is, I think we should expect a whole lot more of this in terms of false flag operations. It's not a surprise, but, thankfully we have the technology to actually prove this came from the terrorists, right? And they could have really averted a real regional war scenario where an incident like this would be used by regional powers to say, look at what Israel is doing to civilians or hospital residences. And so this is something we have to be careful about. The mainstream media, this is how exactly they earn their moniker of fake news. Americans see this and they wonder, don't you do any fact checking in the mainstream media? And how is it that this made the headlines of the New York Times writ large and news organizations across the country? Now, the other thing is you had members of Congress, such as Rashida Tlaib from my home state of Michigan, representing parts of Detroit, coming out and making bold claims about this, blaming the Israelis for the strike. I mean, I think it's really an abomination to have leaders of the United States making false claims like that.
It always comes back to Michigan, doesn't it? It's always about Michigan. I mean, it's either it's football or cars or something like that, right? When we return. Welcome back to our fabulous panel discussion. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. placed a formal gag order on former President Donald Trump. In the gag order, Judge Tanya Chutkan, an Obama-appointed judge, argued that Trump's statements pose sufficiently grave threats to the integrity of these proceedings that cannot be addressed by alternative means.
But this is weaponry all being done because Joe Biden is losing the election and losing very, very badly to all of us in the polls. He's losing badly. But what they don't understand is that I am willing to go to jail if that's what it takes for our country to win and become a democracy again.
A democracy again. Speaking of democracy, Jonathan, is this what happens in a democracy?
Well, obviously, these are unprecedented times, right? We've never had a former president of the United States and a leading candidate based on current polls go through this kind of political prosecution or persecution, I think, depending on your view, right? And at the end of the day, I think whether you like President Trump, whether you dislike President Trump, this is good for President Trump in terms of proving his point that he is a martyr for the cause of America first. And this is a politically driven hit job by an Obama appointee, as you point out. What it's bad for here, John, is this is bad for political discourse and free speech and political speech. I mean, this gets to the heart of, I think, what the founders had intended in the First Amendment, right, with politically protected speech. Because imagine a scenario where you have, if the president decides to join on November 8th in the next presidential debate on the Republican primary stage, and you have former Vice President Mike Pence, or you have other leading candidates press President Trump on January 6th. What is he going to do? Answer with a no comment? I mean, this is really unprecedented, and it really sets us up for some bad, I think, things going forward as a nation if we don't protect politically, even unpopular speech.
Iris, are we in uncharted territory here? I mean, here you have the gag order, you have the indicted president numerous times, and yet his poll numbers, I mean, there are new polls out that say he's actually ahead of Joe Biden, I think in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. What's happening here, do you suppose?
So this is definitely unprecedented. Donald Trump himself has said that he's the first ever presidential candidate in the United States to run with a gag order. So we heard the judge, Tanya Chutkan, saying that it's not going to prevent you from talking about your political opponent, Joe Biden, or the Biden administration, except, of course, for the special counsel. However, we heard, for example, Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene speaking right outside of the courthouse in D.C. earlier that political campaign by nature is going to be disparaging. Of course, it's going to have comments on those issues and on those people. So when it comes to how it's going to affect the 2024 election or how our country goes on in the future, I think this is a big question.
Kingsley, is this a vague ruling? I mean, or overly broad? It seems like there was a deliberate attempt here to leave a lot of wiggle room so that this gag order would cover a lot of areas of Mr. Trump and people in Trump world. What do you make of that?
I think it was absolutely deliberate because let's call this what it is. It's election interference, plain and simple. The DC regime knows that Donald Trump's most powerful weapon is how his message resonates with the American people. It is his vernacular. It's how he connects with them. They are hell-bent on destroying that advantage. But of course, I don't think it will work. What MAGA unleashed in 2016 is here to stay. Gone is the Republican Party of, tax cuts, endless foreign wars, and gay marriage. We are now a party that engages in the culture war. We are realists. We are restrained when it comes to foreign policy. We favor economic nationalism. That's not going to go away. This gag order, mark my words, will not work.
Is there actually a literal attempt to actually have Donald Trump in handcuffs and thrown in jail? Is that this is the logical extension here that could happen. Is that a realistic possibility? Is that what they're looking for or what they want the visual to be?
Absolutely. And I think, the January 6th prosecutions have shown us that it's not just Donald Trump they want in handcuffs. It is the American people. If you are a conservative that believes, crazy things like there are two genders or that American priorities should come first, or you like to go to Latin Mass on Sundays, you are a target for this regime. You want to express yourself and you want to be a patriotic American while the regime wants to see you silenced. And that is exactly what they are doing to Donald Trump. He so often says they're coming after me because I'm fighting for you. And we have seen that nowhere clearer than this gag order.
Iris, what do you suppose is meant by this phrase, interested party or interested parties?
So apparently, according to the judge's order, it refers to, let's say, witnesses or even including former Vice President Pence, who was involved apparently in the case. So that question is exactly like Jonathan said, whether, in several cases, for example, in the classified documents case and in this case about the 2020 election, when, for example, Pence gets mentioned, will Trump be able to mention him, criticize him, or respond to any claims about him? So, that's pretty much what's uncharted water here. How is he going to address these issues?
How is he going to address these issues? I'm sure we'll find out. And with Donald Trump, it's always interesting to watch, that's for sure. New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham signed an executive order this week mandating state agencies to transition to an all-electric vehicle fleet within the next 12 years. Earlier this year, Grisham issued the Clean Car Rules, which mandated that automakers deliver an increasing percentage of new zero-emission cars and light-duty trucks for sale in the state beginning in 2026. And Jonathan, you, of course, an economist, but what happens when you have a state mandate from a governor, which I don't think has actually been passed by the legislature? Maybe I think this is just executive order, just basically ordering that suddenly we're going to have electric vehicles here in about 6 years. I mean, what's up with that?
That's a very good question. There's a couple of points on that. First of all, I'm not against electric vehicles. My wife has had a hybrid for 15 years. It's been a good purchase
Michigan,
for her.
goodness sakes.
And Michigan auto manufacturers are making tons of electric vehicles these days. Unfortunately, they're not profitable. And that's another question. But I mean, to get to the New Mexico point, though, is, Governor Lujan Grisham has been one of the worst governors in America, in my view, most anti-taxpayer governors in America. She just had a unilateral action action that really defied the Second Amendment on gun ownership around the Albuquerque area recently. So this is not anything new that she's trying to govern by executive fiat in this kind of a case around the legislative branch. But then I think the bigger question is this something that is good for America, good for New Mexico, that a governor through a swath of the pen can come in and just say we're going to move to electric vehicles? I mean, this is a bigger question, but I mean, this is not the only state that's moved in this direction. I mean, even a broader ruling than New Mexico was under the California regulatory regime. The California Air Resources Board, I mean, they've had a plan in place to actually ban the sale of new gas-powered vehicles by 2035. And then you have states like my state of Virginia that are following California's lead and basically just outsourcing their regulatory regime to these type of radical Green New Deal style policies coming from places like New Mexico and California. So not a big surprise that Governor Lon Grisham is pushing the envelope with anti-taxpayer policies, but this is obviously much bigger than New Mexico alone.
Iris, it's interesting. There's an exception. There's always an exception. But anyway, the exception of the order includes law enforcement vehicles, firefighter trucks, and some other heavy-duty vehicles, basically saying that if there's a life-threatening emergency, we're going to use a diesel or gas-powered vehicle. But if it's not that important, we're going to send an EV because it's not really that reliable. Is that what basically they're saying?
Well, that definitely touches on the most important issue, which is when it comes to emergency situations, will an EV be reliable? So, of course, we know that a lot of people have EVs right now. It's, apparently all over the country. But, like you said, when it comes to fire trucks, or, that is the real question, not only when it comes to EVs, but also when it comes to our power grid. For example, the Biden administration has been pushing for this clean energy transition, not only when it comes to EVs, but also when it comes to, let's say, wind power and other resources. But when it comes to actual emergency situations, or when it comes to the actual backbone of our country, can we rely on those quote unquote new or green technologies? I think that's what upcoming questions for the administration when it tries to proceed with this push for the green transition.
Kingsley, when are you buying a Tesla?
Well, I'm not planning on buying a Tesla anytime soon because while they're unreliable, as Iris notes, they're also incredibly expensive. And to ask New Mexico taxpayers to subsidize effectively, Greta Thunberg's pipe dream that will have zero net emissions is ridiculous, especially when they don't have to. In 2022, New Mexico was the second largest crude oil producing state behind Texas. There's absolutely no reason for New Mexico people to become tree-hugging climate alarmists that drive only EVs. They have the resources to be able to use gas. And I think, as we approach 2024, that really needs to be something that we hammer home as America First conservatives. We need to unleash our domestic energy dominance. We are far too reliant on an increasingly unstable Middle East for our oil. We have to frack here at home. We have to drill here at home.
Tree-hugging climate alarmists? That's good. I haven't heard that before. That's. I'm going to have to remember that one and come back to that one sometime, here or there. Very good. We have about a minute or so left. It's time for our crystal ball question. A group of pro-Palestinian protesters overtook the Capitol Rotunda Wednesday afternoon. Take a look at this. That was actually the rotunda in the Cannon House office building. Some people said it was the Capitol, but actually it was just the Cannon building. But Capitol Police announced they began arresting protesters after they did not comply with their orders. Question, will Democratic lawmakers denounce this as an insurrection? Kingsley, what do you think?
I won't hold my breath because unfortunately we live in a country that has a two-tiered system of justice. I will say that I would love to see these crazy radical lunatics being thrown in the DC gulags along with the January 6th protesters, but sadly I don't think that will happen because there is a double standard that exists.
Do you suppose there's overlap here with the EV tree hugger climate activists and these people?
We can throw them all in the gulag as far as I'm concerned, John.
Iris, what do you think?
So we know the fact here is about 300 people were arrested in that building for, of course, these protests that violated Capitol Police rules. But when it comes to condemnation from Democratic lawmakers, I would doubt it, because we are apparently still hearing a small portion of them still voicing, different voices about what's going on in the Middle East. So I doubt the majority of them would come out to speak against this.
Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, and also with reports of violence against police officers, right? This is going to put Attorney General Merrick Garland's pledge to a test, right? I mean, are we going to have a two-tiered system of justice or not? We'll find out very soon. But I mean, I think Americans look at this and say, we're kind of surprised, A, the squad wasn't there protesting along with them. But B, I mean, this is why I always call Washington the land of make-believe, right? I mean, this is a two-tiered system, and Attorney General Garland is going to be put to the test very soon. We'll all know whether that was just political spin or whether that was actually something he believes in.
That's a good point. I think we're going to hear more about it. I think you're absolutely right on that. Panelists, we are all out of time. Thank you. When we return,